So I will scroll down. Here it is. Okay, image source. That's it. That's all it wants to display, so I don't need to put the image name anywhere else. But it does have these two other attributes that it's showing me. It has alt text and a width and a height. So I'm like, okay, cool. I will copy that. Except I don't have a girl in a jacket here. I have red lasers in a circle and 500 pixels wide and 600 pixels tall. Let me think about that. That won't do. I don't think so because my image is a square. Now my image is 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels. That's a lot of pixels. That might be wider than the width of your browser window, depending on the size of computer that you're on. So I'm going to take a more modest size, maybe 700. And I know that I have to make this height 700 as well, because if my image is a square, then it's 7:7 ratio. Okay, so I will save that.
How can you see how big the image is?
So the image can be a different size than the size that the browser will draw it at. So I want it to be a little smaller than it is. 1500 by 1500 pixels is, I think, too big for this browser. And I'll show you how it looks. Overwrite. Let's go back to our page. Okay, so here it is. This is 700 pixels wide by 700 pixels tall. So we can go back to Atom, and this will be funny. Let's make it 1700 pixels wide. So we're going to stretch it lengthwise, but I'm going to keep the height the same, just so I can demonstrate to you what happens. And there's a number of things that might happen. The browser might, and I hope that this is what the browser does, it might stretch my image really wide but keep the height the same, and then it'll look really funny, so it'll distort the image. Or it might try to compensate for me and stretch the image really wide and then also stretch the height, or it might just not stretch it. But hopefully that's not how it's written. Yes, excellent. Okay. Never know what to expect with modern browsers. So the browser has a bit of its own like behavior baked into it in a way that it's going to interpret the code. Okay. So that's what that, so it's actually taking those pixels and stretching them along the length that I told it to stretch them to. So that's, we definitely don't want that. That doesn't look very good. But like another funny thing we can do is just make it really huge. Even bigger than the original image. The original image is 1500 pixels, and I'm making this 1700 pixels by 1700. And so it's still gonna do that. So now it's like really big, and I lost some quality because the browser is adding pixels. It stretched it to be bigger than it actually is. Fun. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Questions about tags? Questions about, oh yes, this, I should tell you what this is. Or maybe someone can guess what this is. we've been talking a little bit about browser interpretation and like alternate types of browsers that might read information to somebody, etc.
That's what it would read if you have like the reading on, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it would read. So, whatever text you write in here, it's important that you write descriptive text. So, and like descriptive and not redundant. So if I wrote like I wanted to write initially a picture of red lasers in a circle, but then I'm like, of course it's a picture. Like they know it's a picture. It's an image tag like that. That's just going to increase the length of the amount of listening that the person on the listening browser is going to have to do, and it's not going to tell them anything that they don't already know. So I was going to write like red laser sculpture, but that, I mean, maybe I could say a red laser sculpture in a circle shape, but it's more important to describe the sculpture, like to describe to them that it is a circle than like the fact that it's a sculpture. So you kind of have to choose your words like in a way that is the most descriptive, if that makes sense. And there's best practices, and you can look them up online, like what's the better way to do it. But there's also like some amount of like interpretation on your own part that you can do, where you just think about like, what do I want to communicate about my information, and prioritize that, and like lead with that. So that's the alt text.
If an image has alt text, like on any website, like if you Googled something, like would the alt text, like, would that help it come up? Like,
Absolutely, yeah. That's another really good use of alt text is, yeah, Google searches. Great question. So even if you can retitle your image in a way that makes more sense, that's not a terrible idea. Um, Although definitely not the most important, but yeah, every piece of text that's in your website gets traced by search engines, and like the more sense it makes, the higher up it gets bumped, and like the more closely it's reflected within searches. Okay. I'm going to check the assignment just to make sure I've like gone through all the things that you need to know. Looked at an image. Okay, we talked about directories, links. Oh yeah, file naming protocols. So we talked about like the index.html files and how they're prioritized in different directories. And the only other thing I'll mention so far about file naming is, well, we've also talked about like how this is not the best name maybe for your file because it doesn't mean anything. It means something to the computer and it'll show it, which is great, but it's not going to mean anything to a search engine, and it's not human readable. That doesn't make it easier to find. If it was called something like red laser circle, that might be easier. But the other thing that's useful is like where you put your capital letters and spaces and so on. So if my link, for example, was like a red dog, I was gonna have a file here about a red dog. If I have a space in my name, that's going to cause a problem because the name is something that goes before the period in a file name, and then the type, the file type, is after the period. So the fact that there's a space here, it's like red what is read another HTML file? Is read another image file? Is read part of the dog file? Is it like it's unclear how, in what way they relate to each other. And sometimes your computer, like when we're in the file browser in our regular like computer interface, it's pretty good at dealing with spaces and file names. It understands them and like makes up for it, and the files work. But a lot of situations, like if you're interpreting HTML code and then like turning it into something else, the space is going to get read as red was a bad choice here because I'm saying red. It's going to get read, as in reading and writing, as perhaps another character, like perhaps as the character for space, rather than a space, if that makes sense, right? So it's like you've suddenly created two things in this name. So we always want to, just for ease of use, make your name be without spaces, and then you have a few choices of like how to differentiate your item here. You can make underscore, and we can see underscore is used here. This auto-generated file name from my image software from my camera, my iPhone camera, puts an underscore. You can also use something called camel case notation. So you can write orange and then just capitalize the dog. So it's like a camel, right? And that way you know that you don't have like an invisible character that might be interpreted one or another way, or that your browser or your software will just look for something called orange and then stop reading after the space maybe. Okay, so I like camel case. I will leave it like that. I'm gonna save this. It's still in downloads, so let's put that back in here and overwrite and reload this. Okay, my image looks pretty good. I have my homage to HTML1 scrolling at the top. And then when I click on this link, we have our 404. So this is a file not found message that the i6 server has pre-baked into it. And that's because the file in my actual folder is still called dog. It's not called orange dog. So if I want to make this work again, even though the file is empty, I just hit space in CyberDuck. You might have to like right click and then select rename, or control click and select rename. And here case is very important. So orange dog is written lowercase orange, and then the D is uppercase, and there's no spaces. I have to recreate that exactly for the link to work. So the computer is going to go exactly where you tell it to. So you have to be consistent with the way you organize your letters. Spelling matters. If you, like, I sometimes have doubts about my spelling, like how many E's are in marquee. So one thing you can do when you see something like this message, I know I clicked on orange dog because the computers are showing that to me, so I can highlight it and copy it, except I just downloaded it. So that's another way, and then I can paste this. So then I know for sure my file names are the same. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back and click on this, and we have an empty window, which is a good sign. It means that we actually went to a file that exists. Okay, so for the last thing that I'll do today, well, the first thing I'm gonna do is go sit by my charger. Okay, we're going to validate this file.